Welcome, Your Excellency, distinguished guests, colleagues and allies. Wallawana Yindawan, Yindawan Jamaga. My name is Cheryl Hedges and I'm honoured to welcome you here today to this panel. I serve as the head of the First Nations Water Branch in the Australian Government Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water. As a proud Walbunja Aboriginal woman, I bring not only my professional experience, but also a deep personal commitment to the work that we do to support better outcomes and work in partnership with our Indigenous people in Australia. It is a privilege to be part of efforts that advance water access, management and ownership for Indigenous people across Australia. Today's gathering is a significant opportunity for us to share knowledge, strengthen collaboration and continue shaping policies that reflect the voices and the rights of Indigenous communities. I am truly excited about the conversations we'll have here today and the insights that will emerge. It is my pleasure to open today's session by welcoming a very special guest. Inga Axio Albinsson is a South Sami and was raised in Stockholm. Inga is currently the president of the Stockholm Sami Association, a role that she has held for the past 3.5 years. Inga brings a rich and varied background, having worked across Asia and West Africa, and primarily in the development sector with Swedish and Canadian companies, and now as a consultant. Her passion for empowering women and reducing harm from alcohol and drugs speaks to her deep commitment to community wellbeing. We are honoured to have her here to open our session and offer a welcome to country. So please join me in warmly welcoming Inga.
So welcome to Sweden and welcome to the Swedish part of Sápmi, the Sami land. Some of the Swedish land is Sami land. We don't own the land, but we have the right to use it since immemorial time. Urminnes hävd in Swedish. We acknowledge the Sami people as the traditional and continuing custodian of that land, mountains and waters. We pay our respect to the elders, past and present, and we express gratitude for them, for the knowledge that we have inherited, as well as we recognize the young emerging leaders. We embrace the spirit of reconciliation, working towards self-determination of our land and equity of outcome, and an equal voice for Sweden Sami. Our deepest wish is that Sami voices be heard and respected in Sweden, and then that consultations, FPIC, etc. are not only lip service and words, but words with a content.
Thank you, Inga. It is now my pleasure to invite Helena Tybell, Executive Director of SIWI, to join this session. And we know that SIWI's role is to convene and support creating platforms such as this, and where multi-stakeholder voices can be influencing the world global arena. So with that spirit, we are very grateful for Helena here to be with us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Welcome to this first high-level panel at World Water Week focused on Indigenous leadership in water stewardship. It is a privilege to be here together with Indigenous leaders, governments, partners, and many of you here in the audience. This is a shared space to listen, to learn, and to reflect on the vital role of Indigenous leadership in shaping water governance. We are especially grateful to the governments of Australia and Canada for enabling this panel, and to all Indigenous leaders who are sharing their experiences here this week. World Water Week has, over the past years, sought to curate spaces where Indigenous voices can be present, shape the dialogue, and influence decision-making processes. But much more needs to be done. Globally, indigenous territories cover more than a quarter of the Earth's terrestrial land and inland waters, areas that include many of the planet's remaining ecosystems. And their knowledge and governance are indispensable for facing many global water challenges. Yet, indigenous peoples remain underrepresented in water dialogues. While climate, biodiversity, and forestry processes have made strides in recognizing and including indigenous peoples, water discussions have lagged behind. This panel is an important step towards addressing that gap. Today, we will hear strength-based stories of advocacy, resilience, and intergenerational leadership. Our role here is not to speak on behalf of indigenous peoples, but to ensure their voices are heard and valued in global water governance. Together with our partners, CIVI is grateful to help convene this space, supporting where we can and learning along the way. But it is the leadership of the indigenous peoples that must guide the path forward. We look forward to the dialogue in this session, and especially to the statement that will be presented at the end of the week, a statement that can carry these perspectives to the upcoming COP30 and the 2026 UN Water Conference and other global processes. Let us approach this conversation with humility and openness, committed to ensuring that indigenous peoples are no longer absent from the global water agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you, Helena and Inga. We appreciate the effort that you've put in for us today and to the lead up to the forum. But as we begin our first session on Indigenous women as water protectors, it is my honour to introduce a powerful voice in this space, Masaka Looking Horse. Come up, ladies. Mikasa, 28, is Mohawk. She's a Wolf Clan and Lakota from the Cheyenne River Restoration, raised on Six Nations territory, and her Lakota name means red earth. Trained from a young age in Indigenous knowledge systems, she has served as a Sundance leader for women for over a decade and a lifelong water protector. Mikasa's leadership bridges tradition, activism and education, and she currently serves as the Traditional Ecological Knowledge Community Navigator for the Six Nations Polytechnic and the Global Climate Change Centre. Mikasa regrets that she's not able to attend in person, but she has shared a few thoughts in two videos that we will be showing this morning on Indigenous women's lived experience and advocacy across diverse actors. So let's hear from Mikasa from her first video.
So to tell you a little bit about my leadership journey, it was really tough in the beginning because we had to get this really big momentum going, and it was a lot of conversations, a lot of advocacy, and oftentimes I was at the intersection of my community holding up a sign all by myself saying "Stop Nestle," and I had to do that over and over again for my community to be like, this is something that we really need to take advantage of and pay attention to and take action on. And so creating that momentum at first might be a little bit hard, but once you get it and grow, and it continues to grow, and you have a lot of passion behind it, it can really turn into a really great thing. And you can find your support systems, your allies, and your brothers, your sisters, your aunties and uncles, and bring them together to know that that water protection is super important. And at the time, I had to let them know that Nestle was taking 3.6 million liters of our aquifer water from underneath us, and that water source is not replenishable at all. So once it's gone, it is gone. And Nestle was taking that water from our future generations, essentially, because we'll never see that water again. And they were making millions off of it for a long time. And so we had to stand up against them. And so I created rallies, runs and rides, not rides, but runs, which is having people and youth run from from one point to another point. And so with the message that Nestle needs to stop taking our water and they need to leave our lands essentially, and get off our lands. And so that's one of the huge things that our message was. And one success that came from that was that we were able to push Nestle off of our lands and for them to stop taking that aquifer water. So that was a really, really huge success. And other successes that come with that, or others, there's a lot of things that can look like success and that are successful, and that can just be having conversations and spreading the word of awareness of whatever it may be, whether it's water extraction, whether it's land taking or reclaiming lands or reclaiming your language. It can look a lot like a lot of different things. So it's important to step back sometimes and realize what work have you been able to achieve and keep that as a success. And so those are some things that are really great to know, and that's what a lot of times success can look like.
So thank you, Mikasa, for those powerful reflections. And it's wonderful to see such a young, strong Indigenous woman showing that advocacy and leadership role to her community and the people so that they can maintain momentum and protect the water that is so important to the community and people. So it is now my pleasure to introduce Kay Blades, a proud Menandangi woman and long-time advocate for Aboriginal water rights in Australia. And Kay has a leadership role in integrating First Nations knowledge into water governance, with deep roots in on-country work and advisory roles across national committees. Welcome, Kay. But I do have a question for you. And it's about, what does meaningful involvement of your people look like across all stages of water management, including from policy development to implementation, monitoring and evaluation?
Thank you, Cheryl. I guess just to share from my experience since being in the water space for some 13 years now, it's important for my people, as well as other First Nations peoples from Australia, to be at different levels in the conversation. We have to be there at a high level, strategic level. We have to be there at a state-based or a territory-based level with governments. We also need to be there at local government levels, and we have to be there at community level. And there's not just one of us that does all of those roles. So typically with my family, there are many members of my family working with other Menandangi people that fill those roles. So we're not just one voice, we're many voices.
And you've got your presentation?
I do. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, as Cheryl's introduced me, my name is Kay Blades. I've travelled from Australia to be with you today. I am a Menandangi woman. I am recognised as a traditional owner and custodian within the Menandangi Nation. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of this land that we meet on today, the Sami people. I'd like to pay my respect to elders past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge my elders, for it's their strength and knowledge passed on to me that grounds me in my cultural identity and my work in the water space. I have broad experience participating in water decision making in Australia, both at a community level and at the highest levels of government. My journey has showed me that protecting and advocating for Indigenous rights to water is about partnerships, relationships, accountability and trust. It is about standing firm in spaces where our voices are often missing and making sure that those spaces transform to include us. There are still too many times that Indigenous people in Australia are left out of decisions relating to our land and waters, because contemporary Australia views our land and waters as natural resources. When we are excluded, the system loses the wisdom and lived experience that will make the management of our lands and waters sustainable and just. I serve on 3 advisory bodies to government, including the Committee on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Water Interests, or COWI as we are known. COWI provides advice and guidance to governments and pushes for structural change in how water is managed and governed. We are working to ensure that Indigenous Australians have enduring access to ownership of and management of water. My work on COWI is grounded in one core belief, that my voice matters, that our voices matter. The knowledge that Indigenous people in Australia hold, passed down through the generations, is essential as we face future challenges together. I have 3 main expectations when I advocate for Indigenous leadership in water planning and management decisions. My first expectation is that water policy makers in Australia develop a deep respect for cultural authority and country-specific knowledge, right people for right country. This means the onus is on governments and organisations to improve their understanding of who holds cultural and legal authority to speak for country. For Indigenous Australians, the term country encompasses our spiritual and cultural connection to land, waterways and skies, including all living things. There are over 250 Indigenous nations in Australia, each nation having its own language and culture. This can make it quite complex for governments to make sure they are speaking to the right people for the right country. To give you an example of this complexity, I have cultural authority to speak for my country as a Menandangi woman, passed on to me from my Werribone elders and people. But as an advisor to government, I cannot make decisions on behalf of all Indigenous Australians. My second expectation relates to the phrase, "nothing about us without us." This phrase sets a standard that needs to be upheld. Greater trust in Indigenous knowledge and skills is essential, particularly in areas like natural resource management. Indigenous knowledge systems developed over centuries offer valuable insights into sustainable practices that can complement, if not lead mainstream methods. I have observed that Indigenous voices are only invited to participate in decision making at the margins or in symbolic ways without authority. Engagement with Indigenous people about natural resource management, particularly in a changing climate, must be transparent and truthful. Importantly, engagement must be resourced and remunerated to demonstrate the value of Indigenous people's knowledge and experiences. My third expectation is that Indigenous people are involved at every level of water reform, from design, implementation and monitoring. We want to be present right to the end of monitoring success. Indigenous people understand water is living and interconnected. Rainfall, groundwater, wetlands and rivers are part of a whole interconnected system. What happens in one part of the system has a direct flow-on effect on what happens downstream and throughout the entire ecosystem. I want to see more Indigenous people involved in decision-making at the community level, the catchment level, and at the state and federal level. In closing, I would want to say again, my water journey has shown me that protecting and advocating for Indigenous rights to water is about partnerships, relationships, accountability and trust. Water planning, implementation, monitoring and evaluation must all be shaped in true partnership with us. This begins with respect for cultural authority and country-specific knowledge. It's not just about who is consulted, it must be the right people. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay. So it is now my honour to welcome our next guest, Lisa Kaupakwalak. Lisa's leadership and advocacy have had a profound impact across Inuit communities and beyond. Lisa's journey has been guided by a deep commitment to serving her people. And this included working with the Markievicz Corporation and Inuit Circumpolar Council of Canada, and where she served as Vice President and President from 2018 to 2025. Lisa's work spans climate advocacy, environmental review, Inuit health and cultural storytelling through theatre. So Lisa's going to address today about where her leadership journey began, what role Indigenous people play in protecting water systems and climate change, and what policy shifts might be needed to ensure Indigenous knowledge and leadership are central to climate change and water security. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Cheryl. Ullusiakut ilunnasi nakormeiktunga suttitauatta. Imavut means our waters. Indigenous peoples globally have a sacred connection to water. Our spirituality, our laws, and our indigenous knowledge have taught us to care, protect, and conserve all the elements that sustain life: the ice, the land, the waters, and the animals. From an Inuit lens, the ice, fresh water, and ocean are one system connecting the entire planet and shared by all global residents. It is a universal common gift. The quantity and quality of the fresh and marine water systems are, as we all know, under threat. I want to share a bit of my journey and the case of how climate change leading to loss of sea ice has consequently increased shipping in my homeland. We want to ensure the protection of the oceans through sound governance informed by Inuit knowledge and priorities. I am an Inuk, born among a marine people. My family and our ancestors before us paid attention to the ebb and flow of water and its phases from the freshwater lakes that feed the ocean and to the essential ice that we as Inuit have used to survive. The loss of our Arctic ice dispossesses Inuit and our animals of the platforms and safety needed for survival, and increased vessel traffic brings more activity, risks of spills, underwater noise, black carbon emissions, and pollution. The concern from Inuit was the increase in shipping in our waters as countries looked north for new resources and transportation routes. One of the many challenges that we face as Indigenous peoples lies in the fact that we do not have a seat at the governance tables where decisions that impact our lands, waters, and ice are made. The United Nations system recognizes our rights through the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. But what needs to change now is for the international organizations to open the door to us in these forums, so Indigenous knowledge and our perspectives are equitably included and inform the decision-making processes. In 2018, one of my first trips as an elected leader was to the International Maritime Organization in London, learning how it works and exploring how we could influence decisions that would protect our Arctic waters. The IMO is run by states who decide on global maritime transport regulations, including in the polar code boundaries, which includes Arctic waters. I attended the IMO under other groups or state delegations, as there were no Indigenous groups with independent status. Over the next several years, I encouraged IMO members to integrate the Indigenous perspective so that regulations take into account Inuit communities and their knowledge in guiding the prevention of pollution from Arctic shipping. Our leadership at the IMO elevated the revision of guidelines for the prevention of underwater radiated noise in the Arctic. And although voluntary, the revised guidelines incorporated valuable input from Inuit. It took 7 years of advocacy and at times with aggressive opposition from countries that didn't want Indigenous voices at this table. But in July 2025, this year, ICC, Inuit Circumpolar Council, was officially granted permanent consultative status at the IMO. The first and only Indigenous representative within this organization. The door was opened. This historic decision means Inuit will continue to have our own seat at the table where international shipping standards are set, and will be able to advocate directly on issues that affect our communities, lands, waters, and ice. An Inuit perspective within the IMO speaks for sustainable, safe shipping, not only to protect the Arctic environment, but also because a protected Arctic marine environment respects the rights of the inhabitants of the planet. I want to thank the organizers and you for caring enough to prioritize this important issue, and I want to leave you with a message of hope, the ongoing empowerment of our leaders and youth to be heard, and to reaffirm the work that we must engage in together as Indigenous peoples to safeguard our global water systems. Let us embrace the we spirit. Nakormi mareluk.
Thank you, Lisa, very much. But let's go back to Mikasa to hear in her second video about opening up spaces for youth to have that part of the discussion.
Thank you so much for this next question, because I think it's extremely important to be able to have Indigenous peoples and Indigenous youth in leadership spaces. I think it's extremely important. And one of the things I definitely believe in is that every delegation should have a youth group or cohort that they train and that they're able to bring with them on these work trips, like at the United Nations or at Siwi, for example, because those spaces is where you're able to have and make connections with other international peoples. And so if they are having an action or if they have an idea, they are not only supported of where they come from, but also globally. And I think that's one extremely thing that we need to focus on and create, is these spaces where we're able to help each other and create dialogue between each other, whether we're protecting lands or if we're protecting waters, and how to best help and support each other as well. Because once you're in that work in your community, it can often feel lonely, and in these spaces you're often seen as someone who is I often see someone who is doing similar work as you, so it's really important to have somebody to talk with and to have that dialogue and to have support, and know that you're not only supported in your community but also supported globally. And that's really something that I think is super important for Indigenous youth who aren't often supported to be at these high-level spaces. And one thing that I think recommendation to have these policy spaces to open up is to have resources and support for Indigenous peoples or youth or Indigenous youth, so that they're able to participate, and so their travel would be covered, their board would be covered, and they're able to do what they do best, and that's creating change, and that's creating dialogue for future generations, because Indigenous youth and Indigenous peoples are our future. And if you look at that 90%, 80% of the biodiversity on Earth is managed by Indigenous peoples, and so having that data being supported is extremely important, and to support Indigenous peoples to be able to govern our own lands and waters is also super important, and to create those conversations and spaces where we can have those conversations, and like this panel where we're able to spread awareness. Nyawe.
Thank you, Mikasa. This first part of our panel has focused on Indigenous women sharing their lived experiences as water protectors and their advocacy across diverse sectors. The stories we've heard from Mikasa, Kay and Lisa remind us of the strength, the leadership and vision of Indigenous women bring to water stewardship. I appreciated the powerful reflections on their expectations for how Indigenous leadership must be embedded in all aspects of water planning and management. True water reform will only be achieved when cultural authority is respected and Indigenous knowledge is empowered to guide decision-making at every level. We strengthen water governance when we honour the deep responsibilities that Indigenous peoples carry for their land and water. Can we just have another round of applause for Mikasa, Kay and Lisa? Thank you. So it is now my pleasure to welcome Hank Ovink to the panel, a global leader in water governance and resilience. Hank recently led the Global Commission on the Economics of Water and played a key role in the 2023 UN Water Conference. As the world's first global water ambassador, his work has brought creativity and urgency to water issues worldwide. Fun fact, Hank has the word water tattooed in all 6 UN languages. He's not going to show them today.
No. Tomorrow morning for the swim.
And he sails and swims wherever he can, and Hank's connection to water is both professional and deeply personal. Hank, welcome very much.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Thank you, Cheryl, and thank you also, Siwi, for bringing the voice of the Indigenous peoples from around the world here at this stage, at this water stage. And first, I want to acknowledge and respect the traditional lands and waters of the Sami people. Swimming, this morning again, in the ancestral waters of the Sami people connects me to their water and helps me better understand my relationship with the values they share and the water that they share. I also want to acknowledge my mother and father, not coming from an indigenous background, but they taught me many things that are true to these values that we share, but I want to share too. My mother shared always with me, and they're no longer here, but in spirit, that inclusivity is a verb and not a noun. And that is something I learned in the context also of these multilateral processes, that if you continue to practice inclusivity, it becomes active and activism, and it helps every time to remind you that you have to do this 24/7. My father, and my mother was a true activist, I'm not going to talk too much about her, but my father, as an engineer architect, learned me to always do things together, but start with a question. And that's starting with the question. I also learned when I worked on the LA River, and Sam Dunlop from the Tongva people, when we were working together on that LA River, which of course no longer is a river because it's like a concrete slab, started with the group when we were working, and he asked the question, why are you here? And understanding why are we here makes us understand the relationship to the land and the waters that we share. Now, to those languages, I try to find the word for water in indigenous languages, and there are so many. And I think I'm not big enough to capture them all. But I think that also resonates with the true value of the many voices and interpretations and the values behind that water. Can I have my slide? Yes. And you think, what has this to do with the indigenous part? I set up and led the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, and if you were at the first part of this morning, Johan Rockström, one of the co-chairs and leading voices on water and climate, shared some of our insights. But what you see here is that how this hydrological cycle actually works. And most of the time, the water we talk about is the water that we call technically blue water. It's the water in our lakes, in our rivers, in our ocean, in our groundwater. And we think that that blue water is also the water that rains on us. But it turns out that half of the water that rains on us is not the blue water, but is the green water. It's this magical water that transpires, not evaporates, from nature, plants, wetlands, soil. So healthy soils and healthy lands create healthy streams of rain. Half of the rain on land comes from green water. So thinking about World Water Week with its relationship to climate, indigenous knowledge and capacity, and the way to move forward is really not only about valuing water, but it's also about valuing land. And the combination between the two are distinct. In policies and practices, it's hard to find that relationship. And amplifying that capacity of how water regulates our world, ensures safety and security for our economies, our societies, and our cultures, going back and forward, means that that connection between land and water has to be made. If we want to deliver on our goals, SDGs, Paris, and anything else, having a stable hydrological cycle is going to be key. And that comes in keeping, of course, climate change within means. The 1.5 as a dream, the 2.0 hopefully as a realistic approach. As Johan said, the combination between the two on how water is not only the victim of climate change, but also the regulator of climate change, is going to be of critical importance to bring that holistic perspective of valuing water and valuing land into that same realm. And then coming back to the relationship with indigenous knowledge and their practices, this now comes from science, and the indigenous peoples from around the world told that story for so long. The understanding and the relationship between our natural sources and the values that they bring for the future that we care for is key. It's common. And then I'll end with the importance of how to embed every voice into a process moving forward. When we started the UN 2023 Water Conference, we said inclusivity is that verb, my mother told me. And making sure that that process towards 2023 was a process that was inviting, but was also securing that that space at the table was designed and co-developed with the voices, the ideas, the inspiration and the knowledge of everyone. And indigenous peoples have to have that seat, and ensuring that they can help not only, that we not only help have them at the table, but they can help us in shaping the table and organizing the conversation and setting the agenda and understanding not only the needs, but also the ambitions that we have to work towards, has to be part of that ambition towards 2026 and 2028 and post-2030. Because if we want a future of a stabilized hydrological cycle, it is a future where the indigenous knowledge, capacities, cultures, and voices help us understand that future, shape the narrative, and implement the best practices that will create that combination of where values of water and land are shared. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Hank. Thank you. So Hank's presentation offered insights into the critical role of forests in the global hydrological cycle. It connected the important role that Indigenous knowledge and values play in restoring water landscapes and advancing water resilience in a changing climate. Hank showed how important it is to integrate Indigenous governance systems within those global water goals. It is a matter of justice and effectiveness. We heard that water connects us all, and only through shared stewardship can we truly secure our future. By honouring Indigenous knowledge alongside scientific and policy tools, we can create more holistic, equitable and sustainable approaches. Can we just, I know we've ducked out, but can we just give one more clap for Hank? Thank you. To begin the next path of our panel, we're talking about pathways to influence. And we're honoured to hear from Sinea de Valle, a Wapacacha leader from Brazil and a powerful voice in global climate and Indigenous advocacy. Sinea serves as the COP30 Special Envoy for Indigenous Peoples and co-chairs the UNFCCC Indigenous Caucus. With over a decade of experience, she bridges Indigenous knowledge with policy through her work in environmental management and climate leadership. So Sanaya has provided a pre-recorded video.
Sou Cineia do Vale, do povo Wapixana. Estou aqui na terra indígena Raposa Serra do Sol, no Centro Regional Lago Caracaranã. Esse é um momento especial que nós estamos aqui para falar sobre essa questão da governança da água pelos povos indígenas. Para nós, os povos indígenas, nós temos indicadores tradicionais, vamos dizer dessa forma, porque nós os povos indígenas, para falarmos sobre a importância da água, a gente vive nesse contexto, nós temos uma conexão com a água diretamente, porque os povos indígenas têm uma conexão com a água diretamente com a natureza. E quando nós estamos falando dessa questão de indicadores de água, por exemplo, eu quero trazer para vocês a questão da aninga. Aninga é uma planta que fica dentro do igarapé, ou córrego, ou um rio pequeno, como queiram falar. E essa folha, para nós, ela é um indicador de água. Por quê? Quando a aninga fica do lado de fora, que o rio seca, essa aninga morre. Mas quando a gente tem água, a gente tem uma floresta de aninga dentro da água. E nos nossos planos de adaptação indígena, o indicador que nos indica, por exemplo, que o impacto das mudanças climáticas nos igarapés que secam, que aquecem as águas, o indicador para nós é essa planta aninga. Então é muito importante dizer que para nós, os povos indígenas, a governança da água, nós temos muitos indicadores naturais. E gostaria de dizer também que no Brasil nós temos a maior bacia de água doce do mundo. Porém, nós precisamos cuidar para que ela não seja contaminada e chamar a atenção para esse Dia Mundial da Água de todos os países. A água, ela é essencial para a vida humana na Terra, mas também para toda a biodiversidade. E a gente realmente precisa tomar uma decisão enquanto o aquecimento global da Terra. A gente pode realmente trazer estratégia para a questão do não aumento de 1,5 graus, porque sabemos que o aquecimento global está secando rios, está matando plantas, está matando animal, e esse momento é um momento essencial, porque por esse caminho a gente pode ter num tempo muito curto a questão da falta de água no mundo, e principalmente na maior bacia do mundo, que é a região amazônica do Brasil. Então é muito importante que nós chamamos a atenção para esse momento.
And thank you, Sanaya, for drawing attention to how important it is to protect freshwater aquifers and basins from contamination and pollution. It is my pleasure now to welcome Ms. Pasang Dolma Sherpa, a leading advocate for Indigenous knowledge in climate and environmental policy. As Executive Director of the Centre for Indigenous Peoples Research and Development, Pasang has spent over 2 decades working with Indigenous communities, women and local leaders to promote cultural values and traditional knowledges in forest and climate resilient efforts. Pasang holds a PhD in climate change education and has served in key roles with the UNFCCC, UN-RED, the World Bank and IUCN, helping to shape global policy from an Indigenous perspective. And Pasang is going to talk about today about how research can elevate Indigenous knowledge in water governance, both locally and globally. Thanks, Pasang.
Can I use the...
Absolutely.
Yeah, I have in my laptop.
Yeah, all good.
Thank you. Tasidile, good morning, everyone. Tujise, thank you so much for your invitation to this high-level panel on Indigenous knowledge at the heart of decision-making, lessons for water. My great pleasure to be here for the first time in the land of Maoris, land of Samis, our Indigenous brothers and sisters. Indigenous peoples around the world, water is sacred. Water is life. Water brings us into this shared world. Water touches us how we live, moving with humanity, nurturing and connecting everything it touches. When we say water is life, we are not just using the metaphor. We are speaking of our relationship to the land and water. There has been some progress in recognizing in the importance of indigenous values, worldviews, knowledge system, research in the collective efforts for climate change and restore the integrity of nature. For examples, under the UNCCC, the establishment of the dedicated platform of indigenous peoples and local communities is one of the examples for enhancing indigenous-led research, indigenous peoples and local communities engagements. I have been lucky to be a co-chair, the first co-chair, and working very closely on indigenous curricula while working on the three functions of the platform within the UNCCC almost for 5 years. Under the UNCVD, there has been newly established subsidiary body on Article 8J and related provision, especially prioritizing on indigenous land tenure security as an indicator for Kunming Global Biodiversity Framework implementation framework. Yes, the distance between the recognitions of indigenous peoples' issues raise concerns on the paper. However, its practice remains wide on the ground. Across our regions, in the name of conservation and development, indigenous peoples still face eviction, disposition, and displacement. I speak from the place where water, land, forests are kin. Our relationship is practical. Our food, health, safety, and also spiritual, cultural, and social connection. The water and the other natural resources are managed, sustained by indigenous peoples, women, youth, through customary governance. Customary institutions remain this relationship with roles and responsibilities and accountabilities for everyone, including women, men, elders, and youth. I just would like to give a few examples from the communities I work very closely. In the mountains, Chum Nuvri, the indigenous communities, have been protecting their water, natural resources, biodiversity, and maintain the ecological connectivity through continuation of Sagya customary governance system. And good news for all of us is, most recently, it has been legally recognized as the Sagya Conservation Act 2022. Similarly, in the plain region of Nepal, the customary institution and governance system like Burger, Balmansa of Tharu communities, my apology for flipping, Tharu, Balmansa, Burger communities have been maintaining the water canals through Desawar and Chaudhary, who have made sure the flow of water in the lands of communities and with the equal distribution of water that all the plants will have a healthy growth. And the ceremonies and the ritual make sure that all the waters brings with the blessing for the plants, for the growth of the plants, but also bring good vibrance for the community. What happened with my... Sorry for this one, but I don't know. Yeah, okay. Yeah, and then also, I'm just sharing this story of indigenous communities in the mountain and the plains. It's not just the stories. There's our operating system that is happening on the ground right now, building our own resilience. Customary governance, holistic stewardship, intergenerational knowledge transfer, these are the real outcome of the people and the mother nature. Yet, indigenous people are too often invisible in the national law, budgets, plans. Our relationship approach that does not nearly fit to the box because our work is community-led and our world is relational. So as we all are aware, our interconnected and symbiotic relationship of indigenous people with our surrounding landscape and nature, embedded with the spiritual and cultural values, the basis of our livelihoods, ecosystem, biodiversity, and climate adaptation. However, still we are far behind in the heart of decision-making bodies, our leadership of indigenous people, as a result of which gap is in the intergenerational knowledge transfer of indigenous people to the young generation has ever increasing day by day. Therefore, I urge all of you to be open-minded, foster the deeper understanding and appreciation of indigenous peoples' diverse knowledge system, the knowledge system of understanding, knowing our lands, water, forests, one that ensures inclusivity and continuity by our children and the grandchildren. In conclusion, cultural, spiritual, and relational dimension that indigenous people hold with ecological connectivity should be part of our spatial planning in the discourse of climate change, biodiversity, education, research, development for building our own resilience, living with respect and dignity in our own lands and territories. Let me close where I begin, with water. Water teaches us the power is not holding on, but is flowing, finding the path that nourishes life and returns again. If we allow indigenous peoples to lead with our values, our respect, reciprocity, responsibility, and our knowledge system will restore the integrity to our waters and dignity to our decisions. And finally, indigenous-led research, education, development from our holistic perspectives and indigenous people's self-determined development is the basis of our future. Thank you so much for your attention. I look forward to walking this path together in partnership with humanity, with hope. Thuchise.
Thank you, Pasang. Pasang is going to leave the stage because she has to catch a flight, so thank you, sister.
Thank you so much.
Safe journeys. It is now my pleasure to welcome our next speaker, Shama Hussain Gargash, representing the United Arab Emirates, the host nation for COP30. And as we look ahead at the pivotal global gathering, the UAE's leadership in climate diplomacy and sustainable development is under the spotlight. So today we are honoured to hear how they are working to ensure Indigenous peoples are not only included but actively shaping the path forward, and especially in accelerating the progress under SDG 6 for our clean water and sanitation. So Shama, what inclusive processes will be used to elevate Indigenous voices in water governance?
Thank you. Can I just kind of talk
absolutely.
about it? Okay.
Yep.
So first of all, good afternoon, and truly thank you for the Government of Australia and the Canada Water Agency for setting such an important session, bringing voices of Indigenous peoples in this conversation around water. And I think since day one, since the day our resolution was being adopted in September of 24, we heard remarks from almost all member states, and there was a big emphasis on the inclusion of Indigenous people. And so since day one, we truly understand the value of inclusivity. We cannot kind of segment water for certain groups. Water is a common human right and a basic human right that everyone needs to have access to, but also a shared resource that everyone needs to have responsibility over. As co-hosts of the 2026 UN Water Conference, the UAE and Senegal are truly committed to ensuring that collective action remains a guiding principle. We firmly believe that only through inclusive multi-stakeholder engagement that we can make real progress on the global water agenda. And as I mentioned, we have been including Indigenous peoples throughout the process since day one. And starting off in 2024, which we call the year of our consultation, we really underwent a thorough consultation, made sure that we spoke about water, listened to every voice across the various platforms and spectrums. And so everyone's voice is extremely important. We talk about the inclusivity, but we really also want to not talk the talk, but really walk the walk, and ensure that we do bring around a global awakening about the role that everyone needs to take in valuing water. In Islam, there's a beautiful verse in the Quran that says, وَجَعَلْنَا مِنَ الْمَاءِ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ حَيٍّ. And in English, it translates to, from water we create life. And so we forget how common values, whether different religions or different beliefs, but we truly have fundamental values that we all agree on and build on. And I think we need to move forward towards really the prosperity of our future together and our generations, and really build on the common values that we all share moving forward and not our differences. And our differences are there to find creative ways to work together, not to work against each other. And during our formal consultations on the themes, we launched a multi-stakeholder online consultation. So the 3rd of March was one of the first mandated meetings that we took place this year, mentioned in the resolution, where we listened to all member states and stakeholders on their views and comments on the themes. We understood that not everyone was able to join. But we also made sure that we worked very closely with UNDES and the UN system to allow non-state actors to be a part of the process. And that was something that we truly believed in and really fought for. We had over 4,000 people listen in just on that one day. We also followed with an additional online consultation that same month to ensure that we listened and briefed non-state actors. We then rolled out an online survey, and that survey was basically a basic questions and wanted to make sure that also allowing more opportunity for different stakeholders to contribute and give us their input and insight. And amongst we received almost 495 inputs, which also included voices from Indigenous peoples, youth, and women as well. And last month in New York, in July, when the themes of the 6 interactive dialogues were adopted by consensus, which we're truly excited, you were so happy about. Also, Indigenous representation was alongside the member states and other groups. And we also made sure that there was an integral dialogue and everyone had an opportunity to voice, to share their concerns, but also bring insight into areas that we're not really always aware about. And so really, UNDESA, thank you for bringing everyone's voices, and we want to make sure that everyone's voices is heard as co-hosts. Our commitment goes beyond just the participation. We've integrated Indigenous people into global water action. And there was one of the representatives from, I think, Indigenous person from Australia, and she spoke about the simple Indigenous science and detecting where water was through dragonflies, and that was such a beautiful, simple story. But really, this is how even our people, way before our times as Bedouins, really needed to navigate and use nature as a way to determine the next path and kind of life, really. And so that was just a beautiful, beautiful story, and it's such a heartwarming, message from her. But this is the kind of tradition and knowledge that we truly deeply value. And when we talk about water prosperity, really talk about strengthening the resilience. So we talk about water for planet, and drive into innovation underwater. And when we talk about innovation, it's not just the high-tech solutions, but really looking at the simple solutions. And we look at the Indigenous peoples' solutions in science, drawing into their knowledge and values through simple solutions and practices. And so from the co-hosts, the interactive dialogues are going to be the drivers to the outcomes of the conference. The co-chairs process has already started. The letters went out last week. We do anticipate hearing from member states on their expressions of interest to co-chair, but also to come to us with their concepts for the interactive dialogues that they'll be moving towards. And we want to ensure that the process does not only include member states, but also non-state actors. And this is a very important part to achieve impactful outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaila. From a First Nations perspective or Indigenous perspective, it's really important that those non-state actors have a voice at the table, because often we're not part of those other formal processes. So thank you for sharing that. I'd now like to welcome Dr. Malika Sobey, an Indigenous Fijian scientist and advocate whose work bridges science, community and policy. Malika is currently a Senior Technical Advisor for Coastal Ecosystems with GIZ Pacific, supporting blue carbon projects across 4 Pacific Island nations. And with over 20 years in academia and regional leadership, Malika's expertise spans coral reef ecology, water quality and climate adaptation. Malika is going to share how community-led action from coast to catchments can shape national water governance. So thank you, Malika.
Okay, thanks, Cheryl. So to provide some context, can I just give a few statistics about the Pacific region? The sea-to-land ratio in the Pacific Islands is 55:1. So we're largely oceanic states with limited freshwater resources. And just under half of the Pacific population lives without access to basic drinking water services, and 2/3 have no access at all to basic sanitation services. So that's just to give you some idea of the scale of the problem that we're dealing with. But water is managed at the community level in many of the Pacific Island countries, especially those in the rural and maritime zones. At the national level, we actually have 2 issues that we need to deal with, because the water sector often works as other government departments. They work in silos, and water is a cross-cutting resource. So they need to work in closer collaboration with especially those sectors that use a lot of water, like the tourism sector, which is huge in our region, and also the agriculture sector. The Pacific Resilience Partnership is about to release a Pacifica engagement strategy for water security that will hopefully foster more cross-collaboration across these sectors. At the regional level, another issue, sorry, at the national level, sometimes there's just too many ministries looking after water and sanitation services. As an example, in Fiji, we have 8 ministries that have overlapping policies and regulations. And what that can lead to is it dilutes responsibilities and accountabilities. At the regional level, engagement's always been traditionally low because other sectors have been considered more important. Other sectors like telecommunications and energy. But I think change is afoot, because as we speak, the Pacific water and wastewater ministers are actually meeting in Honiara, the capital of Solomon Islands. And for the first time ever, they've secured the right to influence regional planning by getting their recommendations from the Pacific Water and Wastewater meetings to be part of the Pacific Islands Forum processes in the lead-up to the Pacific Island Forum Leaders Meeting that will also take place in Honiara next month. And it's actually the Solomon Islands government that's really been spearheading this. So that's a big deal, to get it into the Pacific Island Forum processes. In terms of getting local voices onto the global platform, local voices are being included in global processes through regional fora, where key messages are being taken to global meetings through synthesis reports and the hosting of side events with Pacific themes at conferences like the World Water Forum and the UN Water Conference. And SPC, which is the Pacific Community, it used to be known as the South Pacific Commission, which is where the acronym came from. But the Pacific Community play a lead role in the production of these synthesis reports and in the organizing of these side events. And it's incredibly important for Pacific Island countries to be heard on these global platforms, because we'd like people to know the scale of the problem that we're dealing with. Distance is a huge challenge for many of the small Pacific Island communities. But you know, we actually do regionalism well. We often hear about transboundary conflicts at conferences like this. But in the Pacific, we've got atoll nations that are thousands of kilometers apart, and yet they're so happy to work together in managing their groundwater resources, especially exchanging lessons learned, best practices. So when we do come to these global conferences, sure, we'd like to influence development partners and donors where we need assistance, but we'd also like people to hear about the success stories that we're having and to celebrate those successes with us. Just lastly, I was asked to highlight what lessons freshwater can learn from coastal activities. Recently, the marine space has seen an increase in philanthropic organizations that are actually helping governments with the implementation of their national ocean policies. Perhaps freshwater sector could look at funding from these alternative sources other than just the traditional donors and partners that they work with. And secondly, the need for coalitions. With the conservation of marine resources, we have coalitions of traditional leaders, their community members, academia, researchers, and decision makers from government, all working together in the conservation of marine resources. Maybe we can duplicate the same for those that have freshwater resources that they'd like to manage. Get these coalitions happening. And I think I've just about reached my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'd just like to say thank you to Sanaya, Pasang, Shaima and Malika for their insightful look at the significance of Indigenous voices in actively shaping the path forward in global adaptation to climate change. And we heard about the need to develop collectives and coalitions of experts, including practitioners and community leaders, for innovation and knowledge sharing about water management best practices. It is really disheartening to hear about the poor and inequitable access to fresh water and sanitation in the Pacific, or across the Pacific indeed. And sadly, it's not only an issue in the Pacific Islands. It does happen. Indigenous people are facing similar global issues across the globe, I should say, similar barriers across the globe. And we did hear about the importance of advancing Indigenous knowledge in water governance and climate diplomacy, which can support solution-orientated approaches to advance global action on water and achieve that SDG 6 goal of clean water and sanitation. So can we please thank Sanaya and Pasang and Shaima and Malika for their presentations. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you. To begin our final session, celebrating leadership, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge a significant milestone being marked this year. And in 2025, Mexico is officially recognising and celebrating the Year of Indigenous Women. This national designation honours the vital contributions of Indigenous women to Mexican society, past and present, and brings much needed attention to the systemic challenges that they continue to face. It is in the spirit of recognition and celebration that we are deeply honoured to share a message from Tia Farnes Josefina Santiago, a proud Zapotec leader from the Oaxaca region in Mexico and a passionate defender of Indigenous water rights. Tafanas has been at the forefront of grassroots efforts in her community, including leading a major aquifer recharge project. She currently serves as President of the Oversight Council of the Coordinator of United Peoples for the Care and Defence of Water. Though she couldn't join us today, Tia Farnes has shared a video message that reflects the power of community-led leadership and the importance of centring Indigenous voices in water governance. Now, the quality of the picture in the video is not as good as it could be because it was taken out in the field, but the audio is really clear and Tia Farnes has a powerful message to share. So let's hear from Tia Farnes.
Buenos días, mi nombre es Teófanes Josefina Santiago de la Comunidad del Porvenir, San José del Progreso, Cotlán, Oaxaca. Y iniciamos en el movimiento de la Copuda en el año 2005. Fue un largo proceso de varios años. Los compañeros iniciadores de este movimiento fue el señor Juan Martínez, el señor Odilón y el señor Elías Santiago Sánchez. El movimiento caminó en 3 líneas, lo que es la cuestión jurídica, la cuestión organizativa y la cuestión de acciones. Entonces, nace La organización nace a raíz de una carta de invitación que la Conagua hace a las comunidades de pasar a pagar excedentes de agua. Y pues las multas algunas eran muy caras, ¿no? Entonces unas iban de 2,000, 3,000 y hasta 24,000 pesos, ¿no? Entonces como campesinos y campesinas no podemos pagar esas grandes cantidades y además se nos niega un uso a nuestro derecho del agua. Y nosotros en el trabajo de acciones, pues empezamos a hacer trabajos de recarga a través de pozos de absorciones, a través de retenes, a través de ollas y también el trabajo de reforestación. Y entonces pudimos revertir el problema de la escasez del agua. Y eso nos dio un derecho mayormente grande, que pudimos hacer una demanda ante el tribunal diciendo pues que la Conagua no había hecho, primero habían hecho una ley sin consultar a las comunidades indígenas, donde nos prohibía el uso del agua. Y, y nosotros como campesinos estábamos haciendo un trabajo de recarga del agua. Y entonces la sentencia sale a nuestro favor y, y se mandata hacer una consulta de parte del tribunal a la institución de la Conagua hacia las comunidades. Y este proceso de consulta nos permitió hacer un nuevo decreto que derogaba el decreto de 1967 y nos permitía hacer una coadministración del agua entre comunidades y Conagua. Y entonces eso permitió que se nos otorgara una concesión comunitaria. Pues ahora sí ya no es una concesión individual y nomás te doy permiso y usa el agua, ¿no? Sino también hay que haber una responsabilidad de hacer un trabajo de recarga de agua, de vigilar que el agua se mantenga limpia, de vigilar que el agua no se alcance para todos. Entonces, y de allí, hay un trabajo coordinado con la Conagua, de hacer ese trabajo, ¿no? De cuidado y vigilancia y administración del agua, ¿no? Entonces, como comunidades, pues cada año se rolan los comités para ir involucrando a las comunidades en ese trabajo de conciencia, ¿no? Del cuidado y, y la administración del agua y también ver que esté limpia, ¿no? Entonces se sigue haciendo trabajos de recarga, se sigue viendo que los compañeros que van haciendo un nuevo pozo pues tienen la responsabilidad de hacer un trabajo de recarga, ya sea una olla o un pozo de absorción, ¿no? Hacer trabajo de reforestación y y pues así vamos trabajando y también estar vigilando de manera coordinada con la Conagua, pues que tampoco se estén otorgando permisos de parte de la institución a las empresas, ¿no? Sin consultar primero a nosotros como comunidades. Entonces estamos en ese proceso de coadministración, ¿no? Y viendo pues que realmente el agua siga siendo de uso común para nosotros como comunidades. Pues mayormente las comunidades tenemos el mayor derecho, pues somos siempre por generaciones, hemos estado cuidando a la madre naturaleza, cuidando el bosque, cuidando la tierra, cuidando las semillas, cuidando los minerales, cuidando los animales, ¿no? Pues gracias a esto, pues todavía tenemos pocas lluvias, tenemos todavía tierras, entonces, que nos ha permitido seguir viviendo en nuestras comunidades. Y pues ahora sí, invitamos a la población en general, a las comunidades, al país, a otros países, a hacer este cuidado del agua de manera comunitaria, que es lo que nos va a poder permitir pues que siga estando el agua en nuestras comunidades y poder asegurar que vivan todavía muchas generaciones, ¿no? Pues ahora sí, nosotros como sea ya pasamos, pero los que vienen, los niños, tienen también derecho a la vida, tienen también derecho al agua y al gozo y al disfrute de su territorio. Gracias.
Thank you, Tia Farnes. It is now my pleasure to welcome Laura Savoni, Director of Freshwater Policy at the Canada Water Agency. Laura has spent nearly 2 decades shaping water policy for the Government of Canada and played a key role in establishing the Canada Water Agency. The agency leads efforts to improve freshwater management through collaboration with provinces, territories and Indigenous peoples to proactively address national and regional transboundary freshwater challenges and opportunities. Thank you, Laura.
This moment.
Your mic's on, I think, Laura.
We think it's working? There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Cheryl, and it is such an honor for me to be surrounded by so many inspiring speakers today. It has been really rewarding to be able to learn from you all. and it has been a privilege to play even a small part in elevating Indigenous voices at World Water Week. It has also been a personal honor for me to be the head of the Canadian delegation at World Water Week and to be representing the Canada Water Agency here. So for those of you not familiar with the Canada Water Agency, we were established in 2024 as a standalone agency after many years of advocacy and work to make this happen. The mandate of the agency is to provide leadership, support federal collaboration, and to improve coordination with partners to address freshwater challenges and opportunities. A really important part of the agency's mandate is building Indigenous partnerships, enhancing trust, and participating in reconciliation with First Nation, Inuit, and Métis partners. We are really committed to respecting Indigenous peoples' unique relationship with the Government of Canada and rights holders, and we are trying to do things differently through active listening, collaboration, and cooperation. The agency is also committed to upholding our responsibilities, such as those under the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, which was put in place in Canada, and the associated action plan. Indigenous voices are essential to water stewardship, and as we know, for many Indigenous peoples, water is sacred and honored as a source of life. While freshwater challenges affect all Canadians, Indigenous peoples often face these impacts more directly and acutely. Within the Canada Water Agency, we're striving to value and respect the diversity of Indigenous cultures and knowledge systems, particularly in relation to water. This predates the agency, where we gathered input from Indigenous partners across the country over a 4-year time period to inform the creation of the agency. We also had the privilege of having Indigenous representatives and Indigenous youth as part of our Canadian delegation at the UN 2023 Water Conference. And we also had the opportunity for one of our Indigenous representatives to speak on behalf of Canada at one of the interactive dialogues. To build on collaboration, the Canada Water Agency is taking action to elevate and integrate Indigenous voices and knowledge systems in freshwater policy and stewardship. Additionally, Indigenous peoples hold long-standing data records on their lands, recording knowledge through water, through stories, song, dance, and oral histories. And we're working to incorporate that into the work of the agency. We're also working on developing a national freshwater data strategy with incorporation of information from Métis, Inuit, and First Nations. This strategy will support meaningful role for Indigenous peoples, promote data sharing, and recognize the value of Indigenous knowledge, as well as uphold Indigenous data sovereignty. The agency is also working with Environment and Climate Change Canada to develop a national freshwater science agenda, and that will be done in collaboration with Indigenous governments and organizations to reflect Indigenous voices and to consider Indigenous knowledge systems. As well, within the agency, we have values which all staff must uphold, as well as education and training related to all aspects of indigeneity and reconciliation. And we've also been actively recruiting, retaining, and valuing Indigenous employees within the agency. Institutionally, there are many opportunities to strengthen our efforts to enhance coordination across federal departments and agencies with Indigenous peoples. This includes consistent and long-term approaches for working together, which we are trying to put into place, and inclusion in freshwater governance structures, as well as having distinctions-based approaches. There is also a need to break down barriers within our processes and to elevate Indigenous voices. Additionally, Indigenous data sovereignty is essential to support the control of Indigenous knowledge. Thank you again, and I'm happy to participate in this panel.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Laura. As we continue our Celebrating Leadership session, we turn to a vital question. How can donor institutions evolve to truly value Indigenous and cultural outcomes alongside infrastructure? and assets. So to help us to explore this, I'm delighted to welcome Maria Fiorella Fabella, known as Lala. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Close, okay. A senior water supply and sanitation specialist at the World Bank in Manila. And with over 20 years of experience across public and private sectors, Lala brings deep expertise in regulation, wastewater operations and program management. Thank you, Lala.
Thank you, Cheryl. Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting us to this very important dialogue. And we feel really honored to be alongside Indigenous leaders and water experts and fellow advocates. So you ask a very interesting question about financing institutions like World Bank and how we have evolved our policies on funding mechanisms to ensure that Indigenous knowledge and cultures are included in water governance and water projects. First, let me start by saying that the World Bank has a long-standing commitment to ensure that all our projects benefit, include, and respect Indigenous peoples and local communities. And this is enshrined in our operational policies and in our growing portfolio of projects that work directly with Indigenous peoples. It's embedded specifically in what we call Standard 7 of our environment and social framework. And it talks about meaningful consultation, FPIC, things that I'm sure you're familiar with. But then, is it just consultation? And I think the key word there is you asked about leading, not just consultation. And we have done a lot of, let me start by talking about the research and analytics that the bank has done related to the IPs. And we have some examples in the Latin American region where they developed the first toolkit to integrate Indigenous practices, customs, cultural, and social structures into water and sanitation service management and provision. And this looked at different culturally appropriate technology options that's tailored to the local context. And that work basically told us how to work on water and sanitation specifically with the IPs in Latin America. Also in the Philippines last year, we conducted a survey. It's a very interesting report. You might find the title is No Data, No Story. And this is a report that basically put together all the information nationwide about the IPs in the Philippines. They are a huge, about 9% of our population of 110 million, but also they occupy around, I think, 20% of families living in the extreme poverty. So the survey was conducted with a poverty lens. And the results were interesting because top 3 concerns of the Indigenous peoples in the Philippines are health, education, and the third is access to clean water. So that study tells us where to focus our projects moving forward. And so now with these tools, we can talk about where to go, how to go about it. And the bank has now shifted its policy from the traditional approach of stakeholder consultations to co-creating projects in different regions of the world. So,
thank you.
And I have some examples, actually, if I can. No? So,
got a minute and a half left?
So, all right, I'm going to use that up. So talking about the Philippines, for example, that study led to a project called Pagkilos, and it was just approved by the board in July 2025. And this is really a project that would involve priorities identified by Indigenous peoples and local communities. And then actually they are the ones leading the project. And we are just really at the backside and providing technical support. No? And also in Panama and in Paraguay, there are similar projects that are actually really Indigenous people-led. And so the projects ensure that their priorities are there and directly benefit them. And there is also something maybe you want to look up. It's called dedicated grant mechanism. This is a work of the World Bank Climate Investment Fund and World Bank and Conservation International, where they work. It's a global facility of $80 million that worked with 12 countries, specifically for indigenous people and local communities on forest management. And the results over 10 years speak of the efficiency and effectiveness of climate funds meeting indigenous leadership. So I don't have time to explain everything, but something to look at, the DGM. Thank you.
Catch Lala later, right? So thank you, Laura and Lala. Thank you. It was really great to hear about the Canada Water Agency commitment to working with and in true partnership with Indigenous peoples. So not just in words, but in the actions that you are undertaking. And that's really grounded in the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And we also heard that the World Bank has a long-standing commitment to working with Indigenous people in the water sector. And co-designing operations with Indigenous people is especially significant, because through genuine partnerships you can deliver more inclusive and sustainable outcomes. So can we all thank Laura and Lala for their time on the panel today? Thank you, thank you. Thanks, Laura. Thank you. So as we wrap up today's session, I'm pleased to introduce our rapporteur, Thomas Nolan. So Thomas is a proud Red River Meta citizen from Thompson, Manitoba, and currently works as a policy analyst with the Indigenous Engagement and Partnership team at the Canada Water Agency. His work focuses on building meaningful relationships with Indigenous communities and ensuring their perspectives are reflected in freshwater policy. Thomas, thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Indigenous peoples globally share a sacred relationship with water. Water is life, spirit, and kin. It connects us to each other, to the land, and the generations yet to come. This session has reminded us that water stewardship is deeply intergenerational. Our elders teach us to honor it as sacred, and our youth remind us that the choices we make today will shape their future. We have also heard how Indigenous knowledge systems carried through our languages, our laws, and our teachings are essential to global water governance. From the Arctic to the Pacific, from the Americas to Australia, Indigenous women, leaders, and communities are calling us back to the values of balance, reciprocity, and respect. These values are urgently needed as we face climate change and the pressures on our shared waters. If Indigenous peoples are at the heart of decision-making, then governance becomes more than a process. It becomes a promise to future generations. While the challenges are great, the strength and leadership of Indigenous peoples are greater. Our voices are opening doors, our knowledge is shaping decisions, and our languages will continue to guide us. Together, these give us hope and show what is possible when Indigenous perspectives are truly honored in caring for the waters that sustain all life. I would like to honor what was shared in today's session by closing with a few words in Michif, the language of my people, Red River Métis. Kishchi teamuk, akote itote, kaya pokachi, kaya nendao itateata, kaya shokatoshke, ton miyur kochi, kia ekwa, lisele na koshi, limud kanipochuk na wepochuk. In English, this means be proud, go there, don't give up, don't worry, don't work too hard, just try your best, it's your turn, the sun is coming out. When the people die, they become a dream spirit. When our time is done, our spirits continue, just as our actions continue to echo in the lives of those who come after us. We are judged not only in the present, but also in the future. The real question we carry forward is, will our actions and impacts be positive? Will it nurture? Will it sustain or not? Kishti Marcy, thank you. Pishkapanam Show, take care.
And thank you, Thomas. So thank you all for joining us for this powerful and thought-provoking high-level panel on Indigenous peoples at the heart of decision-making, lessons for water. We have heard from an incredible group of speakers today, each bringing deep insight, lived experience and bold leadership to the conversation. Their stories and strategies remind us that Indigenous leadership is not only essential to water governance, but also to shaping a more resilient, just and inclusive future. To our speakers, thank you for your generosity, your wisdom and your continued advocacy. To our audience, thank you for your engagement, your presence and your commitment to listening and learning. Before we close, I invite you to take one final action, and please head to our Slido and respond to our closing question. What is one way you or your organisation can help to elevate Indigenous leadership in water decision making? Thank you everybody. Walawani, which means have a safe journey home. Thank you.